gonna try so hard to get through this without laughing. Hello and welcome to Give That Fan a Podcast, hosted by Ryan Blake and Paul Valley. We're the only Orioles show that is this one and not a different one, although there are plenty of others. Thanks for choosing us. You won't regret it. At least, I hope not. That's kind of dumb. Anyway, every episode streams live on our Twitter at Give That Fan a Pod, YouTube at Give That Fan a Podcast, and Facebook.com/Orioles247. Later, you can find audio versions on Apple, Spotify, pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at UtahStreetReport.com. Hopefully by now, Ryan and Paul have had enough time to share the live stream on their social media pages, so let's get into the show. I did it! Welcome back to another episode of Give That Fan a Podcast. Paul and I are thrilled this evening to be joined by Vice President of Pitcher List and Orioles fan, Alex Fast. Alex, thanks for doing this, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm always down to talk Orioles at any given time. So when you guys reached out, I was like, yeah, let's do this. This is awesome.
Yeah. So go ahead,
Alex. I gotta say, man. I told Ryan this last week. Without fail, every time that intro plays, and at the end he goes, "I did it." I'm like not positive that that's not live.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, it was the first time I'd heard it, and it is very clever, and like, yeah, you really like, it's almost like a Tim Robinson skit when I hear that. Like that's and listen, gentlemen, you know how exciting to be with some fellow Marylanders the exact moment the Baltimore Ravens schedule comes out as well too. I believe that literally just launched as well. Not to mix and match, but
no, I was gonna say we're competing with not only the NBA playoffs but the schedule release for the Ravens scheduled for 8 o'clock. So we are right in the thick of that as well.
Ryan and I
try to look it up.
Ryan and I actually discussed this earlier in the week and said this is our barometer. Who's paying attention to us? Are you going to watch us? Or are you going to watch the Ravens schedule release? I figured with all the leaks beforehand, people would just tune into us naturally because they already know the schedule, right?
Yeah, that's true. All I saw was week 1 against the Texans, and I'm like, that's a dub. Let's move on. I don't really care about anything else.
Right.
Easy. And we get Pittsburgh coming into town, so I was thinking about wearing my Ravens gear to the Orioles game tomorrow, but sitting in the bird bath splash zone, so I don't want to get my Lamar jersey all messed up.
Listen, I'm trying not to derail your podcast, but I have to say, like, kudos to that organization for doing. That's a fun idea. That's like a great way to make the fans feel like they are involved with the young players. I just love that. Like, we are all very critical of this organization, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly, but like that's a win right there. That's awesome to see.
Hey, Alex, the best way to get your fans engaged with this franchise? Extend Adley Rutschman. Extend Adley Rutschman, and then I'll get as wet as you want me to get. You know what I mean?
There's your sound clip for the podcast.
Right there.
Yeah, I guess I got to get on TikTok or something. All right, yeah. So we'll dive into it. Obviously, with Alex, we want to talk about a lot of pitching stuff, but quick thoughts from both of you on the last week of Orioles baseball. They dropped 2 out of 3 in Atlanta, and then they win 2 or 3 against Tampa Bay. We called it the gauntlet, this rough stretch of games in May for the Orioles. They started off 3-3 against arguably the 2 toughest competitors that they'll see. Paul, I guess I'll start with you since you're my co-host, and we'll get to our guest and Alex. How are we feeling? Just real quick.
Honestly, I feel like they could be 5-1. You know, you're legitimately 2 pitches away from being 5-1 in the first 6 games of this really difficult stretch. The 2-run homer to Kevin Pillar, and the thing is, and I tweeted it out that night, it was Kevin Pillar, right? And it's like there's so many guys on the Braves that can beat you, and it was Kevin Pillar that did it, you know. And then on Sunday, it's that wild pitch. And somebody had tweeted out, I hate the extra inning rule because without that, the Orioles win the game. Well, without that rule, the Orioles don't score in the top half of that inning. So, no, they don't win that game. And it's just like they're 2 pitches away from sweeping that series. But on the other hand, stuff like Saturday night, a guy hits a home run, that happens. That's baseball. You're more upset about the Sunday loss than the Saturday loss. Look, they're 3-3 in the first 6 games against 2 of the best teams, maybe the 2 best teams in all of baseball. They're proving they belong. They're proving they too are one of the best teams in baseball. I'm all in, man. I'm a believer. This team looks legitimate.
Kevin Pillar, by the way, that was his 100th career home run. 15 of those have come against the Orioles. So a frustrating guy. We've celebrated twice when he left the AL East, and we still can't get rid of him. Alex, how we feeling after this week?
Yeah, it's funny. So we had that final game against the Royals, which I think took 5 years off everyone's life because it was such a back and forth game, and it was like I think we were all kind of going through this weird identity crisis of like, why are we making the Royals look like the best offense in all of baseball right now? Like, how is this happening? How is it happening that we keep going up 7-1 too, and then ending up in save situations? Like, what's going on? And I remember distinctly tweeting after that game, like, okay, I don't want to take anything away from what the Orioles have done so far because you have to beat the poor teams as well. But here it is, right? Like here's the first test where we're going to be able to determine, like, okay, are we sort of the Pirates, who did also have somewhat of an easy schedule and have recently kind of fallen off a little bit when it came to more difficult competition, or are we, more of a legitimate contender, right? What the way I kind of phrased it was like we were 8th best in WOBA from the hitting perspective, and 22nd or 8th worst in WOBA allowed from a pitching side, right? So what I wanted to know was like, which side is going to bend or which side is going to break first, right? Which Orioles team is going to show up? And what's been very funny is they've like swapped a little bit, right? Not aside from that first game in Atlanta where it was awesome, we put up all these runs. The offense has been a little bit difficult, really not taking advantage with runners in scoring position. I mean, man, I was on the freeway listening to the game yesterday when we had bases loaded after I think it was a Gunnar Henderson walk, and then they got out of the inning on 2 pitches because of a Jorge Mateo pop out. I was losing my mind. But it's been interesting to see that shift. But like, Paul, as you aptly said, it's very close to us walking away from, losing just one game in that series. That's great to see. It really gives you some more confidence as a fan base, especially knowing that we're going to get more reliever depth moving forward when Tate and Givens come back. And that's great to see. It gets you excited. It gets you thinking about the future. The last thing I'll say too is I made a promise to myself as an Orioles fan at the end of last year where I was willing to let that team off the hook a little bit more because I knew they were going to still be experiencing growing pains. But when they ended the season the way that they did, when we were legitimately talking about playoff concerns or if we could make the playoffs at the end of the year, I made like a promise to myself where it's like, no more of this, oh, woe is me, Orioles fan, I can't believe we won a game. Like, now the standard needs to be higher. And I feel like they're rising to that standard. And that's awesome to see.
I'll tell you, man, not to cut you off. I'm so glad you said that, Alex, because I've gotten so much criticism for expecting like this much more from the team, and people are like, you should just be happy that this is where they are, that they're here, that they're finally back. And it's like, no, once you get back to playing competitive baseball, the barometer raises, and now you need to be thinking, we're this close to the playoffs. What do we need to do to get there? And to fall short when there are things you could have done that could have gotten you there, it's so refreshing to hear somebody like you, Alex, say that, because I think that should be the sentiment of every Orioles fan. Simply being in the conversation isn't good enough. You need to have the expectation that now we're in the conversation, we are the conversation, and we're there, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel so bad, Ryan. Well, I'm sorry to like
No,
derail your outline
chat.
here, but I 100% agree with you. Now, where that's going to get tricky if we take that the next step is how we approach the front office, right? So I didn't get into trouble. No one gets into trouble. It's Twitter. But there was a lot of I might even say there was a lot of conversation. Who the heck am I? There was some conversation and some pushback when I tweeted earlier in the year, we need to be trusting this front office, right? I tweeted that when Grayson Rodriguez was going to start in the minor leagues. And it always brings up that conversation that harkens back to what happened with the Pablo Lopez trade and with the Trey Mancini trade and all that stuff, where it was like, should we be pushing for higher caliber players? Should we be trying to get that final step? Should we be in on Rodon? Should we be in on Nathan Eovaldi and so forth and so on? My perspective was always like, I trust the front office as far as you can, right? Sure, there's always going to be some stuff that they're doing that you don't like with player manipulation. It's sadly a part of the business. I don't like it. I want to see all those guys get paid and have rich, full lives. But like, the people who were okay with Pablo Lopez being traded, with Jorge Lopez being traded last year, they're looking pretty good right about now. Not that Jorge Lopez is not doing well. He has picked up a good save today, I believe, but Cano is literally breaking records. And, Cade Povich is looking fantastic in Double-A right now. This team that people thought was really going to struggle is off to a fantastic start. So while it will be trade deadline time and I will probably be like, okay, it's time to get that next ace, they've earned a little bit of credibility in my mind to be able to deal with the resources that they are given from the people above them in the front office, from the owners, from ownership, and succeed. So like I'm curious to see how that progresses. This tirade is just all to say that like the front office seems like they really know what they're doing, and we've seen some bad ones, right? We've been through a lot of poor front offices. We have a lot of scars, and we're like tough to trust a front office. But when you take a step back, they've made a lot of right moves. They've done some not great stuff, but they've made a lot of right moves.
So let's talk about two of those guys in the Jorge Lopez trade, and I want to start with Yennier Cano. He's faced 57 batters. He's allowed 0 runs, hasn't walked a batter. He hit 1. Allowed 3 singles. By the way, the first one of which was a Baltimore chop, and the second one was a slider to Bobby Witt Jr. that was in the opposing batter's box that he poked through at like 65
Right.
miles an hour.
Yeah.
Just trickled through the hole. So he's allowed 1 legitimate base hit in my mind. Struck out 22 of those 57 batters. His 0.16 whip is the lowest by any pitcher over any span of 14 appearances in the modern era of baseball. That's from OptaStats on Twitter. My question, I guess, for you, Alex, would be it's a 3-parter. Number 1, what? Number 2, why? Number 3, how?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, so I know that a lot of Twins fans are like, well, where was this? Right? Like where he didn't know where the ball was going last year. And obviously the Orioles seem to have made some kind of mechanical tweak that allows him to find the zone a little bit more, especially with his sinker. The zone rate has gone above 60% on his sinker for the first time in history. So he's made some legitimate changes there. The movement profile is just so wholly unique, right? I'm going to look at some numbers, and I apologize because I always look at the side monitor and I always feel like such a jerk because it feels like I'm just not paying attention, but I am.
No, use as many screens as you need.
Okay, yeah, it's like the Matrix over here. It's just Orioles stats all over. So on his sinker, he gets about 3 inches more average of horizontal break on that sinker than league average among righties, and he gets 10 inches more vertical break on the sinker. So there's one wholly unique pitch in and of itself. I feel bad for Eno Saris because he keeps getting flack for the Stuff Plus model not showing Yennier Cano's Stuff sinker as one of the best sinkers in baseball, but that's because it breaks his model. It seems like it's so unique that it almost says like, oh, it must be like this other pitch and it must be a really bad version of it, right? I'm a little paraphrasing a little bit, but it can't even reflect how good it is. The changeup is another pitch, 3 inches more average, a horizontal break, 4 inches more average vertical break, and the slider is a little bit more league average. But when you have that distinct east-west, right? When you have a sinker that breaks so much arm side and a slider that breaks so much glove side, and he has the ability to throw that sinker for strikes, that's so unique. Few guys have that profile and that ability. A lot of guys have the ability to throw nasty stuff, but the fact that he can now throw that sinker for strikes so guys just can't wait him out, and he does it at that velocity, that's elite stuff right there.
Well, and let me ask you this, Alex, and I go to Felix Bautista, and we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but you look at that outing the other day, and he couldn't throw a strike. He couldn't get a ball in the strike zone, and then Chris Holt comes out and talks to him, and he looks like Felix Bautista again immediately after. Yennier Cano came in here last year, and he was walking so many people. It was his biggest Achilles heel, and he was awful. He has 0 walks right now. How much of this, and I tweeted out when Felix Bautista got out of that jam and got the save like 3 pitches later, I said, Chris Holt's a witch doctor. He's a medicine man. He's a miracle worker. How much of this is on Chris Holt? Like the Orioles, they made him the pitching coach because if they didn't, he was leaving. He was going, somebody else was going to take him, and they were able to keep him. How good is he, and how much of this is on Chris Holt?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of it has to be on Chris Holt. A lot of it has to be the analytics department, helping prepare and helping see how they can help guys succeed. But a lot of it has to be Chris Holt and what seems like this kind of pitching lab that they have going, right? Which is taking guys, figuring out what their physical attributes are and how that can best contribute to their arsenal, right? What do you do pronating or supinating? What do you do when you're talking about like scap rotation? Like, what does your body do, and how can we maximize your arsenal as a result of what your body does and make you the best pitcher, make you the pitcher that you are supposed to be, as opposed to trying to change you, right? For Chris Holt, like, it seems like, I mean, I'm not positive, but Bautista seems to be going through something mechanically, right? The four seam stuff is still there. The splitter is the stuff in and of itself. The movement profile is still there, but you all watch just as much Royals baseball as I do. He doesn't know where it's going. And to me, that just means it's purely mechanical. He's a big boy, that guy. He says a lot of moving parts to get there. So I love the fact that Chris Holt can come out. And again, I don't know what gets said on that mound, but if I had to bet, it's like, hey man, what's that physical cue that you're trying to remember to keep your shoulder the way that you need to, right? To make sure that you are, whatever's working on with your mechanics, they all have these physical cues that they think about. Let's remember that cue. Let's stick with that. You're doing great, but just focus on that shoulder. Don't open up too quick. Don't close off, whatever it is. It has to be something like that. But the fact that he can do that and connect with him in that way just speaks to his ability as a pitching coach. So yeah, you got to give him a lot of credit for that.
So I know I said we were going to talk about both guys from the Lopez deal, but I'm going to put Povich on the back burner for a second because I want to keep talking about Bautista for just a moment. Apart from his struggles, his fastball is the best in baseball in terms of vertical movement. That's a tricky concept for people to understand. So for the fans who may not understand, because a pitch can't drop or a pitch can't rise in that sense. So can you explain what makes his fastball so special in terms of that vertical movement?
Yeah, totally. 100%. So you hear a lot of conversation on broadcasts right now about like spin rate, right? Where they're always like, oh, the spin rate is so good. The spin rate is so good. Oh, he gets so much spin on this pitch. Spin in and of itself, raw spin, doesn't matter. If I said to you a pitcher had 2,400 RPM on their fastball, compared to another guy who's got 2,500 RPM on their fastball, it really does not matter. What matters is something called active spin. Active spin, which can be found on Baseball Savant, is a metric that says, hey, how much of those RPM, how much of the spin of that baseball contributes to movement of the pitch? So the way that you would see it represented is in percentage. So if right now Felix Bautista has a 97% active spin on his fastball, that means 97% of the spin that he's getting on the four-seamer contributes to the movement of that pitch. So why do we say that it carries? Why do we say that it rises, even though that's like quite literally physically impossible? When a four-seamer has backspin, right? It's backspinning, it's backspinning, it's backspinning, it's backspinning. When it has a lot of spin and a lot of active spin, air gets under the ball, under the backspin. Right? It gets under the ball, and the backspin essentially works with that air to keep that pitch look like it's rising or look as if it isn't dropping the way that it should be, right? You see a fastball coming at you, and by gravity, it should look like it's kind of dropping, but because the air is getting under the ball, it's not dropping the way we think it should be, and it almost gives it the look as if it's rising, right? So Felix Bautista has high spin with high active spin, which just means that it looks like that ball is going to drop, but it doesn't. It stays up, 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 up. And hitters think, okay, it's probably going to drop a little bit and I'm going to hammer it. It doesn't. And then the last thing that makes him even better, because a lot of people have that. A lot of people have high active spin four-seamers that carry, is his release point. That's why they call him the mountain, right? I mean, like, he has the highest vertical release point of any reliever in baseball, and I believe it's just under Justin Verlander in terms of all pitchers, but he has one of the highest horizontal release points as well, which makes him totally unique. So now we're talking about a pitch that's coming in at an incredibly high velocity that looks as if it's going to drop but does not drop, and is released over 7 feet into the air. And as a result, when you combine those three things together, you just get a pitch that's, if it's actually going in a direction towards the plate and not in the other's batter box or to the backstop, is really difficult to hit. Was that like,
No, that's incredibly helpful.
That was tantalizing. That was awesome. That was awesome. I'm sitting there, I was holding back a smile. I'm like, he's saying this and I understand it, and it's awesome.
I
It's
forgot
awesome.
I forgot I was hosting for a minute, and I was just viewing.
I felt like I was in a classroom and I was like enjoying it for the first time ever. But we talk about this fastball and how it looks like it's rising in the active spin versus the spin, and but you look at Felix Bautista recently, and last year and this year he's averaged just over 99 miles an hour on his fastball, and we've seen him routinely hit 100, 101, and at times 103. Right?
Mhm.
He's been sitting 96, 97 recently, to the point where I mentioned it and somebody was like, oh, now we're complaining about 96, 97. Everybody can throw 96, 97 in the majors these days. Literally everybody can do it. Why is Felix Bautista sitting at 96, 97? Is it because of those mechanics? Is it because he's trying to find more command because he's been struggling? Or is it something that we should be concerned about at this point?
It's a great question. I mean, I would think that I don't know. I have no insight. I would think that if he was injured, he would probably be on the IL by now.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe it's not that. So my best guess is probably your best guess, which is like the mechanics are not there. I don't even think at this point it would be a slow ramping up from spring training because we're a month into the season. He certainly had plenty of opportunities.
And he was hitting those speeds earlier, 100 plus earlier.
Exactly. So it could be that, maybe it's like the cold weather kind of stuff. There was an interesting thing that there's a Robert Stock, who is a relief pitcher currently with the Brewers, who is like so active on Twitter and is like so awesome about like answering questions from fans and stuff, who everyone should be following on Twitter. Also an avid gamer, which is very funny. He's like super good, I think, at World of Warcraft. I think it's that. I asked him about this on Twitter because I didn't know, right? Kyle Gibson goes out there and his slider isn't working. He's got a bullpen 3 days later. He can fix what's going on with his slider, right? Relievers don't have that. You know what I mean? A reliever can't, because they don't know when they're going to pitch. They can't like go have a full bullpen to work on their mechanics because they could be pitching that day. So they can't really throw those bullets. So what he said is they have like kind of dry bullpens. I just think it's something where the Orioles are like, he's going through something mechanically and we're going to let him sort it out on the field. But your guess is as good as mine about the velo. I think I'm with you, though, that it just has to be like, let's get the mechanics right. Let's find that pitch and where it's going, and then we'll ramp you back up.
Yeah. He has still thrown some 99 over his last couple of outings, even if it's not consistent. So that's good to see. But we'd like to see him hit that extra gear, and 102 on the gun is a lot more exciting than 99.
They become an 86 mile an hour splitter that falls off a table. Oh my God.
Yeah,
beautiful.
It's crazy. And you're up in the batter's box and you have a 6'8", 285 pound guy with a 100 mile an hour fastball who has no idea where it's going. I don't know how anybody ever stays in the box and puts up a good at bat against him. And he's been walking so many guys lately, and still I think he's given up 1 earned run in his last like 10 outings, despite seemingly having absolutely no control.
His ERA is 0.6 below what it was last year, despite the struggles and the walks right now. And it's funny you mentioned, Ryan, that he's 6'8". The Orioles starting pitchers, they go from 6'3" all the way up to 6'8", and then you have Bautista at 6'8", and I think Yennier Cano 6'5". Do the Orioles have the tallest average height on their pitching staff of any team in baseball? When I went to the game on Monday night, I thought Kyle Gibson, I'm not gonna lie, I never looked up his size. I thought that he was like 5'11". He walked out there and he looked like he was 7'3" to me. I could not believe how tall and how skinny he was. He's 6'6". I couldn't believe it. I was like,
wait, Kyle Gibson?
Kyle Gibson is
6'6".
He's 6'6". I'm telling you, he walked out to the mound. His pants were floodwater pants, man. Like they didn't even come to the top of his cleats. They were meant for a much smaller man. He looked like Gumby in a uniform. I could not believe how tall and how skinny he was. Blew my mind.
He is listed as 6'6".
He's 6'6". He's so tall. Couldn't believe. I'm 5'7", so like I marvel at this stuff.
As am I. 5'8.5" on a good day. All right.
I call it bullshit, Ryan. We've stood toe to toe.
I've measured it because I want to be 5'9" so bad. I want to be 69 inches tall, and I can't do it. All right. We've talked about the rock in the mountain, if that's what we're calling them, in the back of the bullpen. And looking at our notes and the time here, we have so much I'd like to get to. We're probably not going to get to all of it. Alex, if at any point you have to go or you want to go, give me a little signal and I'll get to my final question. Yeah, just get or just
I'm
leave.
good.
You
I'm
can-
good.
Just leave the studio if that's what it
Slam the
comes
laptop down.
to.
Oh, I guess it's time to go.
Yeah.
All right, I want to ask about Mike Baumann. He was moved to the bullpen before the season after starting primarily throughout the minors. He's had a few bad outings lately after a really strong start to the year. Do you think this move to the pen is good for him long term?
Yeah, I do. I think for a few reasons. I think he doesn't necessarily possess the same, I think, amount of upside that we're going to see from the guys in the rotation at the moment. And if I'm looking at guys that I would want to give more of a shot to in the rotation at the moment, I like, give me DL Hall, give me even Drew Rom, before I want to be getting to Baumann. Heck, I'd even take another like Cole Irvin, like returning and seeing if he can kind of figure it out and get him back up there to get the innings for him. So I don't necessarily mind that. The good thing is too, is like every time you're going to be, going into the pen and working out of the pen, it's going to give you an opportunity to maybe amp up the velo a little bit. He sits, already like he's sitting 96, right, as a result of that. So I think he's going to be more effective when he can do that. I worry that if they were like trying to stretch him out for 5 or 6 innings, if he was going to be a guy who would like dip the velocity back down. So I think him being at 96 is going to be a little bit more impactful. I mean, you see it with the four seam right now, right? It's got a 256 woba. It still doesn't get like a lot of swings and misses, but it seems like it's a relatively good hard contact mitigator. So yeah, I don't necessarily mind him being in the, kind of our long relief guy. I don't really know, who that is for them at the moment, right? Because I thought maybe, okay, it might be Drew Rom for a little while, Keegan Aiken, it wasn't going to be that. And then it was like, okay, maybe it's Austin Voth. And it kind of has been him a little bit, but they might need another kind of long relief guy, and Bowman might be that.
So we'll get to Hall in a second. One more bullpen guy I want to ask you about is Cieno Perez. He has had a very, very rough go of it this season. He's allowing way too many base runners. And this is after a very dominant season last year in which he posted, I think it was a 140 or thereabouts ERA in like 60 some innings. Can you pinpoint what has happened to Cieno Perez? Is he just not as good as his numbers showed last year? What's going on with him?
Relievers are so incredibly volatile, right? I thought maybe, okay, is he not throwing it in the zone quite as much? And I don't think it's necessarily that. He's actually throwing it in the zone more than he did last year. It's about 48%. And last year was about 45%. He also used to be, last year he got a really good amount of whiffs outside of the zone, and he hasn't really shown the ability to do that. The four-seamer is not what it was so far. The velocity is there, which is great. But the results haven't necessarily been there. He has not had a season where the swinging strike rate on his four seam has been below 10%. And this year it's down at like 6%. One of the issues, I think, his inability to elevate as consistently as he used to be able to. He used to be able to pound the top of the zone at about a mid 40, 50% clip, and guys would kind of oblige him out of the zone. He also wouldn't really, go arm side a lot, and now he's kind of going arm side a lot with that four-seamer. So because he's a lefty too, and you're going arm side with that four-seamer, if you're up against a righty, you're just going to knock into the barrel of the ball, right? So he also hasn't been able to, like I said, get that slider out of the zone as consistently. And then as a result of that, the swing and miss isn't there for that. Last year it was about a 14% swing strike rate. This year it's about an 11% swing strike rate. Those are tweaks again, like maybe it's just another mechanical thing. I am so excited to get, Tate and Givens back, because I don't know if I'm trying to check real quick and see if Perez has any options. I imagine he doesn't have any options. So he doesn't have any options. So maybe he becomes the kind of like garbage time reliever for a little while to try and let him figure it out. I'm not really there at the point yet where I'd be like, well, we're gonna cut bait. But I will say this though, one of the most dangerous things that you can have in a bullpen is too many relievers with no options. That's where you really want the options. And listen, you're not sending down Batista, you're not sending down Cano, so that means you've got Baumann with 1, and you've got Baker with 2. So maybe
Baker.
Yeah, but maybe they have to. Maybe they feel like when Givens and Tate come back, like Baker's been great. He's been very good.
Yeah.
But like that's going to be a really interesting conversation to have because you're not going to get rid of Danny, right? You're not going to get rid of Colomb. So what do you do? Maybe they do finally say, you know what, Perez, it's been fun. Let's see if we can sign you to a minor league deal or something. But yeah, maybe that's the move.
Can I ask you real quick, Paul, before you get into DL Hall? Can I ask you real quick where you're getting this information so quickly on which players have how many options left? Because on MLB The Show, it's easy. You click on their player card, you hit the right button a couple times, it shows you exactly how many options have been used. I always struggle to find it online for some reason.
I wish I could. Wouldn't it be great if I was like, it's just my brain. Like I'm just such an Orioles fan that I remember. No, of course not. I'm an
Just
idiot.
have it all.
Yeah, I've got it all. No, if you go to Fangraphs and then go to roster resource at the top bar and click on the on any team that you want to see, there is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th column in from the left is options, and then they highlight it in yellow if there are none remaining. So yeah, that's super helpful.
That is
Beautiful. That is helpful. Thank you.
extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Take it away, Paul.
see, just from hearing people talk about it, I know that both and Perez have no options left. And what I will say is that Perez has been a lot better recently, and I think it's Chris Holt all the way. Like he made Perez that great last year. He made that bullpen that great last year. So I have the faith that he can continue that. But I do want to talk a little bit about DL Hall because Mike Baumann and DL Hall maybe similar career paths where they're like these dominant starters in the minor leagues. I remember DL Hall gets a double-A and he throws a no-hitter against Harrisburg where he's touching 97 miles an hour in the 9th inning of that no-hitter. And we're like, oh my gosh, he could be great. And all these pundits are saying, no, he's going to be a back-end reliever in the big leagues. And that turns out to be what he is. And look at DL Hall. And I've talked to Keith Law about this. I've talked to Jonathan Mayo about this. I've talked to numerous people about this. And you seem to get these mixed reviews. And the one guy that I keep going back to is Keith Law. And he said DL Hall has that potential to be an elite starting pitcher in the big leagues. And the only thing stopping DL Hall is DL Hall. Because he gets to 2 strikes, and instead of trying to pitch to the guy, he tries to blow the guy away. Instead of using his pitches, he can get those strikeouts if he just trusts his stuff. DL Hall, he got to the big leagues this year. He threw 3 innings in relief after Dean Kramer's kind of bad start in that first game of the doubleheader a couple weeks ago. And he went 3 innings, 2 runs, one of them being on a big home run. Walked 1 and struck out 7. And he said before that game, you know, the beginning of this year in the minor leagues was about building up and getting myself extended and getting myself back into that starter role. Now it's about results. They sent him back down after that game. He was the 27th man for the doubleheader. His first start after that, 5 innings, 3 hits, no runs. He had 4 walks, but he had 8 strikeouts. Then he has that start last night where he goes 6 innings, he allows 2 runs, he walks 1, and he strikes out 9. And I look at the start like that, and I look at how his walk rate dropped by 1.5 once he got to the major leagues last year. With Chris Holt there, and what we know DL Hall can do, Alex, are you sold on the fact that DL Hall is 100% a reliever at the big league level, or are you on the same page as I am, where I think he can be one of the best left-handed starting pitchers in baseball if they give him that opportunity?
I definitely don't think at the moment that he should be treated as a reliever. He's young, he's malleable, and none of us are ready to have DL Hall traded because we think of him as a reliever, and then he wins 7 Cy Youngs and figures it out in some other team, right?
We all know that's how it would go.
Yeah, yeah. So I love the fact that the proof is in the pudding, right? You can see on his MILB.com player page what the organization thinks about him because he's going 5 innings and he's going 6 innings, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're stretching him out. They're taking it easy with him. I don't think, Keith Law seems to have put it perfectly. The stuff is there. It might just be a mental fortitude kind of thing, which obviously isn't easy to overcome, but is an obstacle that can be fixed. The Orioles are in a very interesting position because at the moment, whose spot does he take, right? I think there's always an interesting conversation about like, okay, well, he maybe doesn't have too much more to prove at the minor league level. I don't know. Maybe you could say that. Let's say you can say that. The other side of that is there's the 4-walk start. He clearly is still dealing with some command issues. Let's give him 2 or 3 starts to get 1 walk, get 2 walks, whatever, and then bring him up. So let's go to the other side. I'm not worried about the command issues. The stuff is there. Let's make him a starter. So what? No one goes down because everyone is actually performing quite well at the moment. Do you do a 6-man rotation? Maybe. Positives of that. Grayson Rodriguez gets a little bit of a day off. We want to make sure that we're not over inundating his innings, right? We want to take him a little bit easy, make sure he doesn't get more than like 130, 140 in the first year at most, right? But the negative side of that is some guys genuinely do not do well with that. These guys are creatures of habit. And all of a sudden you're saying you're not getting 4 days of rest. You're not pitching every 5th day. You're pitching every 6th day. You're getting an extra day of rest. Some guys really don't do well with that. So I don't envy Mike, excuse me. I don't envy anyone in the front office right now because it's a very difficult decision to make. But your core question of like, should we be treating him as a reliever? No, let's do it. Like I'm willing to give you like a 2-year leash, my man. You know what I mean? The stuff is there. You could be a number 5 right now. Like we don't like, as long as you go up there and know that you're not the number 1 and we don't need to rely on you and you could just kind of breathe that in and be like, I'm just going to be me. Try it. Let's see what we got. Give him a shot.
Good stuff. So I'm going to skip over Drew Rom because we've touched on him very briefly, and we've already dove in twice on 2 left-handed pitching prospects. So I'm going to leave Rom off for now in the interest of time. I do want to get to the rotation a little bit. Tyler Wells, he's currently leading all of baseball in WHIP among qualified pitchers. He has a 3.15 ERA, but a 4.15 expected ERA, 4.96 FIP, 4.55 xFIP. Is Tyler Wells, as Paul and I like to say, is he a dude or has he been lucky? And is he best suited in his current role in the rotation or in the bullpen role in which he, I guess you could say, thrived in 2021?
Yeah, he might be a guy that like you kind of let him keep cooking until maybe he hits a little bit of a wall and then all of a sudden he's our long relief solution, which kind of makes sense to me. He overperformed his numbers a little bit last year, right? Too. He had a smaller gap, albeit between his ERA and his FIP and his ERA and his Sierra, but now he clearly is doing that. He's a little bit of a dude at the moment, just because I look at a 155 BABIP and I see, a 224 average for him. So BABIP is like, for those who might not be super familiar, batting average on balls in play. You usually want to regress to what that pitcher's averages for their career, right? League average is usually 300, and a lot of people will just say like, oh, this dude's got a 200 BABIP, but it's a 300 league BABIP, so there's heavy regression coming. Tyler Wells has a 155 BABIP with a 224 career average, which means that yes, regression is coming. No one can sustain a sub 200 BABIP, absolutely no one, but the regression might not be as severe as that FIP indicates, which essentially could mean that, yeah, he's a high 3, low 4 ERA pitcher, which also isn't necessarily terrible, right?
No, not
the stuff is not great on paper. The 4-seamer, which he goes to about 40% of the time, is okay in terms of like the raw properties of it. He's been able to get a lot of swing and miss on it, which has been nice to see, and he did that a little bit last year as well. The changeup is a really good weapon for him. I don't think as we move forward, we're going to see him to be able to continue with this great stretch that he's put up. But to his credit, man, every team he's faced, he's been able to get out of jams and stay in the game. And his next 2 starts are against Pittsburgh and the Angels. Those aren't the most difficult tests, right? Obviously, Ohtani and Trout and Taylor Ward and the Angels are not bad offensively, but like, I'm just going to keep rolling with it. But it wouldn't surprise me if come All-Star break, Tyler Wells is our long relief and DL Hall's taking that spot.
He reminds me a little bit of Miguel Gonzalez, who's one of my personal favorite Orioles pitchers of the last decade, in the sense that he seems to consistently outperform his peripheral numbers. And so it's obviously something that you hope will continue. Paul, I don't think I let you get. I said that we talked about Hall and Povich. I don't think I let you get to your Cade Povich question.
Cade Povich, he drew rave reviews in spring training. Up until his last couple of starts, he kind of had mixed results so far at Double-A this year. But he pitched this afternoon. He threw 5 scoreless innings. He struck out 10. It's his second such start in the last 3 tries. 3.38 ERA with 44 strikeouts in 26 and 2/3 innings. We've heard talk that he might be the second best pitching prospect in the system. Where do we stand on Cade Povich? Is he as good as the reviews have been on him? Should we be feeling really good about him? We know, and Dan Conley wrote that article last year about how the Orioles pitching prospects, it's kind of barren after Hall and Rodriguez. How are we feeling about Povich and just in general the pitching prospects coming up?
Yeah. So overall in Povich, I think he has the potential to be a really solid mid-rotation to back-end rotation kind of guy, which is like, I think mid-rotation is the ceiling, unless this Orioles pitching lab is even better than we kind of anticipated. But like, I'll take that for Jorge Lopez all day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be really putting him in the conversation in terms of prospects of like a DL Hall, just because, not that you were, but just overall, just because I don't think the actual stuff in and of itself is necessarily there for him, right? He doesn't have one particular pitch that like jumps out at people. If you're looking at his Fangraphs ratings on his individual pitches, he doesn't have one rating that's over a 60 on a 20 to 80 scale, but he's got a really interesting ability to command the ball super well. They gave him like the potential to have a 60 grade on that command. So I do think he can be effective. I mean, like you've said, it hasn't been like the prettiest start so far in AA for him, but he has a 37% K rate right now. Like, that's bananas. That's pretty nuts to see. And this is like the first full year that he has had inside of this system, right? So I'm really excited to see where that levels off at. If like he becomes a 32%, K rate pitcher in the minors, which could theoretically, equate to like a 26-27% K rate guy in the bigs. In terms of the Orioles system, yeah, like you said, there's not a lot of starting pitching. I have said for a long time, and I'm really sticking to my guns on this, that I think the Orioles are following the exact same blueprint that Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal did when they were with Houston, which is like,
I agree,
load up on great hitters, and we're gonna find all the pitchers that we need to find inside of free agency, right? Now, with that said, that was many years ago. Obviously they got Cole, they got Verlander. What's crazy now is the Astros are the only organization in baseball to have their entire rotation be starters that were from their organization, which I think is bananas. So maybe that's what the next plan is. Now that they've drafted all these infielders, let's focus on pitchers. Not to rant too much, because I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much in this pod, but the reason I was willing to let the Orioles off the hook for this past offseason, I said to myself, I'm going to withhold judgment until what I see next year. Next year, there are so many good free agent starting pitchers, so many good ones. We're not going to get Ohtani. That's fine. But there's Julio Urias, there's, Aaron Nola, there's Lucas Giolito, there's Luis Severino, there's like all these dudes, regardless of what they're doing this year, right? Because some guys might hear Aaron Nola and be like, oh, he's terrible. I don't know if I necessarily think that. But if the Orioles sign one of those guys, two of those guys, right, and they make that their priority, because they certainly have the ability to spend that money because they're not paying anyone right now, then I will say I do not care about last offseason. There was a plan, and this is the plan that they've had. But that's what I think they're going to do. That's what I hope they do. And that seems like that's the way that the tea leaves are kind of looking right now, right? Because there's not a lot there. And I think while they trust that pitching lab, they also know that if they're going to succeed in the playoffs, it's not going to be with Tyler Wells, Kyle Bradish, Dean Kramer, Kyle Gibson, and Grayson Rodriguez.
So I'm glad you just brought up those names. That's a beautiful segue, because I want to talk about all three. Well, okay. 3 of the 5. Grayson Rodriguez, his numbers haven't been great, but he has put together some really solid outings overall. Some first inning hiccups that he's gotten over and pitched very well, the rest of his outing. He's done that a couple times, and then he's had a couple really good starts and some not so great. I guess I want to ask, what is his true ceiling? What is his true floor? And does his performance to this point in the bigs underwhelm you, surprise you in any sense? How are we feeling about Grayson?
Yeah. It's been such a journey with him, and it's been so fun to like actually watch him after so many years of speculation and the conversation just being like, is he coming up? Is he not?
Yeah.
I think his floor is a back end rotation. His floor is like a 4 or 5. And that is if you just can't figure it out and put it all together. And I think his ceiling is like, I don't know if I want to say an ace, but 100% a 2. Like his ceiling is like, I have no problem starting him in a playoff game and feeling confident that he's going to help our team and be a dominant pitcher that we can help to build a rotation around. Like you said, at the beginning of the season, it was so easy to be like, okay, he's having difficulty calming down into games. And once he gets settled, he's able to kind of turn into himself a little bit more. We have not seen yet, in my opinion, him fire on all cylinders. Right. Like even that one game against Detroit with the 5 innings, no one runs, 2 walks, 1 walk, 2 hits and 9 Ks. Like even if you looked at the pitch chart there, it just seemed like he was kind of taking advantage of an offense that was really scuffling at the moment. And what's so kind of frustrating is it actually kind of reminds me of what you said earlier, Paul, where it's like the DL Hall thing, where it's like he can get to 2 strikes super effectively, but man, it's frustrating to watch him try and put dudes away, right? Giving up a good amount of contact on 2 strikes. He just doesn't seem like he has his stuff. And then also, I am yet to see a game where he can elevate with the 4-seamer consistently, drop the changeup down at the knees where he wants to, or also put it in the zone and throw the slider the way that he wants to throw the slider, right? I've seen games where he can elevate like beautifully, and then the changeup and the slider aren't there. I've seen games where he can pinpoint the changeup. When I watch him, I just constantly have to take a step back and remind myself that this kid is like 12 years old and it's his first year starting, and prospect growth is not linear. And honestly, like I would like to see him get a little bit more consistency, but we are going to be watching Grayson Rodriguez pitch for a very, very long time. The pure stuff by Stuff Plus has not resembled what it was in the minors yet, right? So I don't know if that's just him figuring it out, if it's him trying to settle in, if it's him still making mechanical tweaks. So it's way too soon to say, oh, Grayson Rodriguez is not going to put it together this year. It would not surprise me if we're in June and he goes on a stretch where he's just dominant. Like that would not surprise me at all. It also wouldn't surprise me if he ended this year with a high 3 ERA and a poor whip and the K numbers that we're not used to seeing just because he's settling in. And then next year he knows he's in the rotation. He knows he doesn't have to fight for anything. He can just focus on that. But I really want to see a start where he's kind of like really clicking. And when he does, I think it's just going to be a thing of beauty.
It's funny. I'm glad you said June, where you could see him just really start to dominate, because I've been predicting, like, you watch these starts and you see these glimpses of brilliance from Grayson Rodriguez. And I said, April, May, it's going to be he's figuring it out at the major league level. Like you said, he's 12 years old. He's still so young, and it's his first taste of big league action. I legitimately think he's going to be their best starter by June. When his stuff is on, it's so nasty, and he can repeat that delivery. I really believe he's going to be their best starter by June, and we're going to be looking at him like this dude is that guy.
Yeah,
Dude's a dude. Yeah, we certainly could. Dude's a dude. All right, last 2 starting pitchers. I've made the decision. We're scrapping offense. This is a pitching podcast. Paul and I will talk about offense later on. Because I wish we could go all night with this. There's so much I want to cover.
So much.
But let's talk about Kyle Bradish, because he's a similar pitcher to Rodriguez in the sense that early on in his major league career, I have found myself watching him get ahead of hitters and then throw like 3 waste pitches per at bat. And I don't have any data to back that up. I might be way off, but I feel like every time he goes 0-2, he's out of the zone and he lets the batter right back into the count. He's had a lot of high highs in his career and a lot of low lows. Who really is Kyle Bradish? And is he a legit rotation piece for the future of this ball club?
I think the stuff is there to be. The stuff is there to be a legitimate contributor to a rotation. I don't know if the stuff that he's throwing right now in terms of usage is there, right? Like it is really nice to see, him having success with the slider, right? I mean, but that's not uncommon, right? This is a guy who's dominant with the slider. I wish he threw it more. The 4-seamer is just not the pitch for him. He gets a little too much cut action on it, I believe. And it's getting hammered again, right? I mean, it had a 410 WOBA last year, and this year that jumps up to a 559. And it's not just BABIP. I mean, it's getting hammered, and it's getting hammered hard. But he has these other pitches, like in his sinker, that was a little bit better last year, has not been great this year, that he theoretically might be able to lean on, or maybe he just turns that four-seamer into a cutter. When he was on last year, I think the reason he was on was because he was able to use his slider in two different ways. He was able to get whiffs on it, and he was able to drop it into the zone for a strike. And like, I wanted him almost to be like what Patrick Corbin was a couple years ago, or even what Kershaw is now, although of course, they really don't belong in the same sentence. But in terms of like, use that slider more. Go to that slider 40% of the time, right? Just do it. Like, let that four seam be your back pocket pitch that you can kind of jam guys with if you need to, or throw that sinker a little bit more. But guys clearly are unable to pick up on your slider well, and I don't know if an increase in usage is necessarily going to bring that back down. If he keeps going with that four seam and trying to find it and make it work a little bit more, then he might be the guy that's like, you know what, you're the guy who's our long relief guy. He's interesting because he's not, I mean, maybe he could be a solid bullpen guy, but like maybe he goes in and he amps up that four seam to like 96, 97 or something, because he's just coming in relief and he's able to have a little bit more success. But he could be the kind of odd man out if he can't get that heater under control.
And last starting pitcher, Dean Kremer. He's had 3 really good starts this year, including his 2 most recent, so he's on a good stretch right now. He's had 5 not-so-great ones, 3 earned runs or more in 5 of his 8 starts. Last season, he posted a 3.23 ERA. Peripherals weren't anywhere near as good. There was a lot of blue on his Savant page. What has gone wrong for Kremer this season compared to last?
Yeah, I think it's another thing that's all related to that four-seamer. We talked a little bit about BABIP on four-seamers and what a good average is and how it should kind of regress to what that particular player's mean is. If you look at his four-seamer BABIP right now, it is a whopping 405, which just means that he's essentially getting insanely unlucky on his four-seamer, right? His league average, or his career average, I should say, on his four-seamer is 324. So it's just not, performing the way that it should be at the moment. It's got a 345 average against compared to a 315 expected average. So I think maybe he's getting a little bit unlucky there. It is still getting barreled relatively hard. He hasn't necessarily made any improvements there. But what's kind of interesting to see is he's still elevating the pitch, I believe, super well. Like, he's still actually having a lot of success getting to the top of the zone. What's super interesting about this is so nerdy, and I apologize. It's almost pathetic.
It's okay. No,
but there's an interesting thing that I'd be really curious to see what happens moving forward, where obviously you guys are smart. You know that the name of the game is elevating your four-seamer, right? Everyone's trying to do it. Elevate, elevate, elevate. Because everyone's trying to do that, I always wonder if batters are then thinking, well, yeah, the last guy elevated, and the guy before that elevated, and the guy before that elevated. So while dudes in the past might have been able to take poor four-seamers and just elevate them and have more success with them, I wonder if Kremer's four-seamer is not good enough to get away by elevating. I wonder if it just doesn't have the properties to elevate as successfully as others. With that said, I think he's a mixture of the two pitchers that we have seen so far. Love that he's blown stuff by the best offense in baseball. Love that he's having those starts. Don't think that's him. Also don't think him getting lit up is really him either. I think he's another guy that is like, man, just like a solid 4-5. But like, man, we're talking about a lot of those now, right? Like, like Kremer,
the whole rotation, right?
Yeah.
The whole rotation, they're all 4s and 5s. Shit.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are we gonna do? But that's kind of the state of it, man. It's gonna be exciting come end of July. It's gonna be real exciting to see what they do when it comes to the stuff. It's a good problem to have. Good problem.
Something we haven't talked about on the show, and I know we got to wrap up here, but John Means, and everybody's like, "Oh, John Means is coming back," and it's like getting the free agent at the it's like making that trade at the deadline. I'm not convinced that John Means is coming back as John Means, coming off of Tommy John surgery. What are we expecting from John Means? Can he help this team make that postseason run? I'm not so sure.
Man, it's such a great question. It's such a case by case thing, but it is such a good counterpoint because you're right. People have just kind of been assuming that he's going to come back. And now what's good is he's not Tyler Glasnow. He's not coming back and we're saying, okay, is he sitting 98? Is he sitting 99? We don't necessarily need to worry about that. Not to do it as a cop out, but like where the Orioles are in the playoff race, I think is going to very much determine how they handle him. And also it's going to give us insight into how they feel as a front office, right? I'm very curious to see what they do at the deadline. Are they going to say, we're confident with the pieces that we have right now, at which point we kind of have to be like, listen, I trust you, but is it going to hurt to get Lucas Giolito or Aaron Nola right now? And that could really determine what they do with Means. Maybe they just baby him. Maybe he's a guy who essentially works as an opener. He's going to go one time through the order and that's it. Or they say, hey, you know what? Bauman, you're going to come in and you're going to work the first time through the order. And then we're going to give Means, the third, fourth, fifth inning or whatever. I don't know. Or maybe they just really let him get ramped up in the minors and take it slow with him. I imagine they feel that he is a part of their long-term plans. Right? Like, I don't know. Let's see when John Means becomes a free agent. I don't think it's for quite some time.
I think he's under control through like 2026. I think I remember seeing.
I don't think it's that. Like, you might be thinking of Cole Irvin. I feel like Means is like after next year he's gone.
Yeah, it's 2025.
You're right. 2025.
Okay.
That's
2025.
That far off, Ryan. Come on now.
You're right. Sorry.
One off. Yeah. So with that said, too, they probably, since they're going to have him for all of next year, they probably will take it a little bit easier with him. Maybe do what the Yankees kind of did with Severino or what the Rays did with Glasnow last year and just kind of let him take it a little bit easy, get him like 15, 20 innings maybe. And then 2024 just be like, all right, man, it's your last year in a contract year. Have fun out there. Give us 200 innings.
Right.
Yeah, very well could be. All right. So I think we have gotten through most, if not all, of the specific players I wanted to ask you about. So let's shift gears for a second. I think I've got you for about 15 more minutes.
Yep.
So when you're evaluating, okay, let me backtrack. Throughout the show, Paul and I have brought up ERA and strikeouts and a lot of things like that. You have brought up things like WOBA and BABIP and Sierra. For a long time, when evaluating pitcher performance, we focused on wins, ERA, and strikeouts. Those were like the big three. It's still the pitching triple crown. But times have changed, and there's a ton of data out there now for us to look at and evaluate performance. So I wanted to ask you, as a pitching guy, what specific stats or numbers do you like to look at when you're evaluating a pitcher?
That's a great question. I like to start with, why is this guy in the bigs? Right? Like, what makes this guy, right? Is it the way that his sinker moves? Is it his slider? Is it his four-seamer? Whatever. What makes him unique and why is he here? I like to look at metrics that are more on a pitch-by-pitch level and are a little less result-oriented overall. Obviously, I rely on WOBA a lot, but I like Stuff Plus. I like PLV, both of which are metrics that are looking at a pure pitch and trying to say, okay, this is how above or below average they are. This is how good or bad they are. And I like looking at ERA indicators, especially for starters, like FIP and Sierra. And I understand that there are plenty of fans out there who are like, stop. Like, why? Like, their eyes glaze over. They don't want to talk about analytics. It's too much. It's ruining the game. I get it. I'm empathetic to that line of thinking. The reason I like to look at those more kind of esoteric pitching metrics when I'm learning about pitching, and the reason I like to study this stuff overall, like, this is how you hold your front office to the fire, right? Like, 10 years ago, you could have thought about average and been fine because that's the way the Orioles were thinking about baseball, because we didn't have an analytics department that was more than 3 people. Now we do, right? So if you want to think the way that the front office is thinking, to try and get insight, to be critical of them, right? Then try to approach the game the way that they're approaching the game. learn about the things that they're thinking about, and you can get a little bit more insight into about how they're building the team. It's one of the biggest reasons why I love studying baseball so much, is to figure out that mystery of what front offices prioritize. Do they prioritize, like you said, dudes who are 6'6", 6'7", who could throw 95 miles an hour and up? Sure, I'm sure every organization does, but maybe that's a particular thing that the Orioles do, right? What is it about the Orioles? What is their methodology, right? And by studying things like FIP and Sierra and Stuff Plus and PLV, all of which is available on Baseball Savant and Fangraphs, and by trying to figure out what it is that makes a pitcher unique between vertical movement, horizontal movement, release point, how much spin or active spin they get on the ball, what spin direction looks like and stuff like that. That just helps me get more insight, helps me learn about these players. Yeah. So those are the metrics did that answer the question, or was just rambling nonsense for another 2 minutes?
That was good.
Okay.
There's a lot to digest in all of it. Whether you're evaluating pitchers or hitters, there's so much that you can look at and so many ways you can break down and dissect what a player is doing, what makes them successful, why they struggle in certain aspects. So no, it's good to have different perspectives on all of that and what you specifically like to use.
Yeah. Stop. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I gotta run. I got a wife who made a dinner for me downstairs, and I forgot to tell her that I was doing a podcast tonight. You know what I mean? So I had an 11-hour day at work, and then I came home and immediately did a podcast. So I gotta run. But Alex, this was maybe my favorite show that we've ever done. This was awesome. You were great. Thank you so much. And I hope to talk to you again soon. I hope to have you on my show, the show that I'm the host of, the Bat Around for Press Box Sports. Hopefully we'll talk on there too.
Yeah, totally. Nice to meet you, and I'll let you know when I'm out east and we can catch a nose game together or something.
Absolutely. Look forward to it, man. Have a great night. Thank you so much.
All right. You too, man.
See you, Ryan. I'll talk to you soon. All right, buddy.
Sounds good, Paul. Alex, can I keep you for about 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance to play the role of GM. You talked a little bit about the front office and what they might prioritize and different things in that regard. So I want to play, I don't know if you call it a game, but put yourself in the shoes of Mike Elias. You have a month to make 3 moves. You can only make 3 moves, no more than 3. What are you doing? And the example that I gave you, and Paul added a note that 6 years wouldn't do it for Adley, but I said, for example, promote Cowser, DFA McKenna. That can be one move. You sign Adley and Grayson to 6-year extensions, and Paul added a note that 6 wouldn't be enough. And then trade so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so to the Brewers for Corbin Burns. Things like that. 3 moves you can make.
Okay, so I'm not making any trades yet. None. No trades. Letting things play out. 1, I am trying to sign Adley to a long-term deal. I think he has shown enough. I think it will cement him as a clubhouse leader. Not that he needs any more cement there. It seems like he already is. But I think it will provide some security to the team, and it will send out a message to all organizations that the Orioles are not some cheap organization, and they have made legitimate changes, and it will attract even more starting pitcher free agents. So I like that move, right? We already changed the wall to make it impossible to hit home run over. Like, sign Adley, because I genuinely think that pitchers hear the kind of player that Adley is, and they're like, "Oh, that's who I want to throw to that guy. That's the guy I want on my side." So that's
everything that I've heard and read lends credence to that pitchers want to throw to Adley.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think even Kyle Gibson said something of like, "Oh, when I came on, I wanted to see if that was all just kind of smoke and mirrors," but it was like, no, he's amazing.
Yeah. I think it might have been in Jeff Passan's article last week or something. But yeah, I remember seeing that Kyle said he was exactly as advertised.
You're right. It was there. Okay, number 2. Send Ryan O'Hearn back down and bring up Lewin Davis.
Diaz.
Diaz, excuse me.
Yeah.
Diaz.
Okay.
Diaz is been crushing it in AAA right now. And I'm a little confused as to why he is, they're both lefties. They both play first base. So I would kind of, he's got some power. He's slashing 317, 423, 505 down at AAA right now.
Wow.
Yeah, he's
been that good.
Yeah, he's crushing it. So I'm very confused. Ryan O'Hearn has had some clutch hits, which has been great.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think my lineup would be a permanent until Mountcastle can kind of get the first base defense a little bit more in line, which he has been recently. I would keep Santander on right, keep Mountcastle at DH, which is where I think he permanently ends up, and put Diaz at first. Don't necessarily mind that. Give that a shot. The last one, I hesitate to say because it's a little hot takey, and I genuinely don't know if I believe it or not.
I like hot takes. Bring it on.
Okay. I think I hate even saying it, so I apologize, but I think maybe you put Gunnar back in the minors and you have Jordan Westberg come up and play third.
Interesting. Okay. I can't disagree with you. I'm not sure I agree, but I don't think I disagree either. It's been a rough stretch for him. Now, he does lead the American League in walk rate among hitters with at least 120 plate appearances.
Yep.
He also has the 10th highest strikeout rate, and he's hitting 175. So there are concerns with Gunnar. His defense hasn't been as sharp as we expect it to be. He seems to be I can't tell what he's looking for at the plate most at bats. It doesn't seem like he goes up there with a plan.
I like very much am not a reactionary fan who's like, he stinks, get him out of here, he's awful. I am like trying to think of what he's going through at the moment and whether or not where the best place for him to figure this out is. Like, again, like you said, love the walk rate. Am concerned about the defense. That's not him. Don't know if he's fully healthy. Don't know. Like, remember in spring training where he was like, I'm just pressing. Right? Yeah. So I think when you have to talk about the stuff, one of the things that analysts don't always take into account because we don't know is what this will mentally do to a player, right? He has said, and it might have been in that past article or in another article by The Athletic, that like he loves the adversity, like he really digs into the adversity. And I don't know what it would do to him mentally if the organization was like, hey man, we need to give you some time to just figure it out. And we want you to figure it out not under the bright lights of an MLB game against MLB pitchers. We want you to get some confidence back down in the minor leagues. If we didn't have Jordan Westberg, who was knocking the crap out of the ball in the minors right now, then I would say, you know what, fine. He's okay in the 8 or 9 hole. Let him figure it out. But I think if we're talking about giving the team the best chance to win, which it's already done, it's winning plenty, and that's great. But I wouldn't necessarily, and that's the other thing too. You can't just bench him because then he's not working it out. Right? Like you want to give him at bats all the time. So I hate that I have to say it, but like if he would respond mentally well to it, if he could get over the, the hurt emotion of it or the pride, send him down to the minors, let him get right, and then bring him right back up.
I will say to play devil's advocate in Gunnar's case, I think back to Ryan Mountcastle and his start to I think it was the 2021 season. I don't believe it was last year. I think it was the year before. He had a really bad April, and there was talk about maybe sending him back down, giving him a chance to work out some things. But I tweeted that I really hope they let him figure it out in the bigs. And damn if they didn't do it, and if he didn't go out and hit 33 home runs and set the Orioles rookie record.
Totally.
So you never know how a player is going to respond to that. And if they get consistent playing time in the bigs, there, especially a player of Gunnar's caliber, there's the opportunity for him to turn it around. However, he's had a bit of a long leash at this point. He's playing just about every day, and we haven't really seen any signs of him turning it around. So maybe a trip back to Norfolk, even if it's just for a couple weeks to get right mentally. Maybe that's what it takes. If I may, I do want to bring up Ryan Mountcastle real quick. Mm-hmm. I know I said I was going to scrap all the hitting stuff, but this is one question I genuinely did want to ask you, because Mountcastle has developed a bit of a reputation as an unlucky hitter, one of the most unlucky hitters in baseball. In terms of the discrepancy between his actual statistics and his expected numbers.
Yep.
Is he truly as unlucky as his data suggests, or is there more to it than that?
Yes and no. He is unlucky, and the data doesn't matter because he's in Baltimore, and that wall is always going to be there, right? He is unlucky because he's also legitimately unlucky because he's hitting the crap out of the ball, and sometimes it's just going right to people.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit of both. Like I don't recall, but I do think last year he was more impacted by the wall than any other offensive player, if I remember correctly, in terms of like home runs that he lost.
It was probably him or Mancini.
Yeah, it had to have been
Trey
one
had
of
a
those two.
Trey had a rough go of it.
Yeah. He last year, it looks like, had a -3 between home runs and expected home runs. And this year it's already at -2. So I look at
Wow.
his I look at his expected, man, it's gonna you know what? I apologize. I pulled up the wrong thing. I was like, how is that possible? It's not possible because I was looking at Dean Kramer's baseball savant page. This looks a little bit more accurate.
Yeah.
Let's look at sorry about that. Let's look at his expected home runs here. So yeah, actual home runs 8, expected home runs 10. So it actually is still -2. 2 home runs robbed. When you see an expected slugging that is top 3% in the league, and when you see him making the same amount of hard contact that he made last year in terms of his max exit velocity, he actually upped his overall hard contact percentage. I really firmly believe that, like, get warmer in terms of temperature, and maybe some of those hits, those doubles, turn into home runs. I'm saying he's truly unlucky, and it'll change.
Okay. I sure hope so. We've been saying it'll change for about a year and a half now. We haven't seen it quite yet, but he's too good of a hitter for it not to work out. Hit at every level of the minors. I think he's your. I've seen some people start to sour on him as the Orioles' long-term first baseman. I still think he's your guy right now.
Yeah. If the defense gets back to what it was last year, then yeah.
That's the thing. The defense, he was one of the best defensive first basemen in the league last year. Didn't get any recognition in the Gold Glove voting, but he was damn good last year. And this year it just has been a different person, a different player. Anyway, Alex Fast, Vice President of Pitcher List. This, as I'll echo what Paul said, this has been a thoroughly enjoyable podcast. Lots of great insight as to what makes this pitching staff tick and talk. That was weird. Thank you for doing this. It was truly a pleasure. Yeah, definitely let us know when you're in town. Would love to hit a game together, chat a bit more. And thank you for doing this. Go ahead and enjoy the rest of the evening with your wife.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. All right. Thank you, as always, to Derek and Tony at Utah Street Report. I think this is the first time in a while it's been just me on the outro. Thanks to Derek and Tony at Utah Street Report for allowing us to host our show on their site. We truly appreciate it. Go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's right below me if you're on video, youtube.com/@givethatfan-a-podcast. You can get notifications when we go live. And we like seeing that subscriber number continue to creep up a little bit. So it makes us feel good, and it helps us grow as a podcast. If you're still here, I guess maybe you enjoyed the show. Please consider giving us a rate or review on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you're listening to the show. And we will see you next time, maybe with a guest, maybe without a guest. But thank you to Alex for doing that with us. And Paul will be back next time, and I will see you next time. I'm so bad at doing this on my own. I'm just going to go. See you next time on Give That Fan a Podcast.